Meditation, and we're here only on the Encounters Network. It's a new night and a new week is what we're kicking off here. So thanks for joining us this evening. It's episode 23, Tim. Can you believe that?
Wow.
It's crazy. I realized that the other day. I was like, oh, we're up in the 20s now. So that's kind of cool. Can't believe it. Anyway, we're going to be talking about spirituality and the meaning of the Star Tarot card. And you know Tarot Tim is in the house with me this evening. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Rebecca. Hey, everybody.
And my special guest this evening is a Reiki Master, teacher, medium, and radio host. I call him a modern-day yogi. Michael Brazell is in the house, everybody. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Rebecca. How are you?
Good. How are you? Yeah.
Doing great.
It's such a pleasure to have you on. So we'll get into it in just a little bit. Well, drinking game alert. Anytime, my special guest won't know it, but anytime anyone says this word, take a sip from your Ace of Cups. So, Michael, I met you at the Between the Worlds conference back in, I think it was 2013.
Yes.
Does that sound right? Okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the Between the Worlds conference is an interfaith esoteric conference that's held maybe every 2 years or so on the East Coast. And I think the next one is in fall of 2015. So if you get the chance to go, it's a really, really cool experience. And anyway, that's where I met you, Michael, and I started following your work on your various social media and your various pages and postings on Facebook, and of course your radio show. You have had a couple of those, and we'll get into that. But so I'm such a fan, and last year you did a guest post on spirituality, this very topic, and the meaning of the Star Tarot card on my blog, 365 Days of Tarot, and it's a great post, and it's actually the post that has the most traffic to this day. So it's the one that it remains the one that people are connecting with. It has the most comments, the most reads, and it's something that people are really connecting with, and it's definitely the most popular post on the whole blog, so that's awesome. And so I'm so happy to have you on the show to share with us your experience and your knowledge. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to have been able to do the blog post, but it's also an honor to be here with you tonight. It's different being on this side of the microphone. So.
I would imagine, Thank you. Yeah, and we'll talk about some of your work with the radio. So tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Mike. I've been doing spirituality professionally for about 10 years now. I left the Navy and corporate world to do spirituality full time and to teach yoga. And I've had, the joy of working with some really great teachers who opened me up to my own intuition, but also opened me up to, just new insights, new ideas, and new ways to engage my own soul journey. And that's what I've made my mission moving forward, is to help others to connect to their soul path through a variety of different means, whether it be blog posts, radio shows, or just the one-on-one connections I have with people.
Right. And tell the viewers a little bit about your radio work, because I think that's really, it's cool that you're on this side of the
it's kind of neat. I've been doing the radio show now for about a year and a half, almost 2 years actually, and it's a really fun show. It's called Soul Interaction Radio. The idea of the show is to engage no-fluff spirituality, so we bridge a variety of different topics. We will go into taboo areas. We don't hold any punches. We have guests that come on who just talk about their work in spirit, but it's also to help people come into community, which I think is really important when we're doing this work. So it's kind of a community show. People can call in, they can post in our live chat, and I let people just suggest what they want to talk about. It's not just me talking the entire time, but it's about us coming together as a spiritual community and engaging that space.
That's great. Yeah, that's so great. So, Michael, the tarot isn't your primary area of work, correct? But it is something that you're more than familiar and more than comfortable with, correct?
Yes.
There's some mediumship. Okay, yeah. That's what I thought. I just wanted people to know that, yeah, you do it all, really. A little bit of
everything.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. You're definitely the, modern day yogi, Renaissance man. It's very cool. So, Michael, one of the things that I like to lead off every show with every guest is really asking them what lies at their core as a reader, if it happens to be like a tarot reader. But for you, I think that it works to just expand, the area to not just the reader, but as what lies at your core as a spiritual teacher and person and guide for so many people. And I feel like this is an important question because I think that it really, hits on what's important in this community and the work that people are doing. So, Michael Brazell, in one word, what lies at your core?
Soul. That is my word. Very simply, the soul. I think
I love it.
For me, everything moves from that divine spark that we all hold. Our traumas, our tragedies, our joys, and our connections to the world around us. So my work is the work of the soul.
I like it. It's very good. All right. So, since we're talking about spirituality, well, how do you define spirituality?
Gosh, that's a really great question. For me, spirituality is our ability to have that direct communion with the divine, whether it be through our various spiritual tools, whether it be through our intuition, whether it be through our interactions with those around us. But I feel that the space of spirituality is limitless. So there are many different ways to access divinity, but when we engage spirituality directly, we're able to have that direct communion with the divine in whatever manner that's presenting itself to us.
Right. I like that. And how is this different from religion? Because I feel like a lot of people are very confused, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's religion and spirituality gets very intertwined. And for me, I don't know about you, but I feel like for me, they're two very different things.
Right, they are. I think with spiritual, you hear a lot of people say, I'm spiritual, just not religious. Or you see people who will compartmentalize the two, whereas spirituality is over here, and it's more the woo-woo fluffy stuff, and then you have religion over here where it's very dogmatic, and it's more of a process. And I think there are beautiful intersections between the two. But I think sometimes with religion, we get really caught up in what I find is the separation between ourselves and divinity. Sometimes when you look at religion, and this can be any religion, whether it be Wicca or Christianity or even Buddhism, where there is me, the intermediary, which may be my priest, priestess, my minister, or otherwise, that stands between me and God or God herself. So it's like when we have spirituality, there is that movement into a limitless space. Whereas sometimes within religion, there is a limited space. And sometimes you get more caught up in the laws of whatever the religion is dictating to you. But sometimes with spirituality, it can be a little too free-flowing. So, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming as far as what we're connecting to and our processes for getting there. So I think a lot of us who end up becoming more spiritual without the dogma of religion usually start off in a place where there's a lot more restriction. So we find ourselves wanting to be free of that restriction. So I find there's more freedom when you can traverse both realms, but we have to look for our own direct connection to source, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I think sometimes people that are really comfortable in a very rigid, dogmatic thing, spiritual to me, you put in the personal work. Whereas if you just strictly rely on the dogma, you're letting someone else do the work and just kind of going along for the ride.
Right. Yeah, I think too, sometimes with the dogma, we're absolving ourselves of the responsibility. I find when we are engaging in a more personal walk with our faith or with our spirituality, we tend to take more responsibility for our actions. Whereas if we're in a more dogmatic system, Christianity is a good example where we can become absolved of our sins. You know, we don't necessarily have to take responsibility, or there isn't necessarily an awareness of things outside of that dogma. So when we are able to move with greater connection to the entirety of our experience and not just our limited space, we're able to see where we can affect change in the world. And I think that's something that's very empowering about the non-dogmatic approach to engaging spirituality.
Well, and my feeling is too that, how do I put this? Like, true spirituality isn't easy either.
Right.
How do I want to put this? Like, I guess the religious road isn't easy, but I feel like the true spiritual road isn't easy either, which is maybe where we get into light spirituality versus, what am I saying here? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I guess you had mentioned personal work and responsibility. Right. I feel like that's so intrinsic to true spirituality. Whereas if you have just your very, I guess, light spirituality, I guess people call them fluffy bunny spirituality.
Right.
Yeah, where there is no responsibility or personal work with that either. Is that the difference?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, when we don't take responsibility for our actions, oftentimes people come into spirituality hoping to connect to that source of light. And we sometimes come in through our traumas, but then we end up suppressing those very traumas that brought us into contact with source. And true spirituality is about engaging the shadow. It's about coming to terms with your addictions, your traumas, your grief, your pain, and also your joy and all that light stuff. Because it's great to be a light worker, but the example I always give is that if you take your hand up and you shine a flashlight on it, the further you pull back that flashlight, the more light shines on your hand, but also the bigger your shadow gets. So you can't just do a lot of light work without expecting the shadow to grow as well. And we have to go into the shadow and that dark element of self. I call that graduation day, when the tires meet pavement and the crap hits the fan. That's the time when we start to do the real work. And it isn't easy, you're right. It's not an easy path to walk, but we have to walk it in the entirety and not just in the fluffy side of it. You know, the heavy, dark side is also part of that path as well.
I think that's true for all spiritual paths because, well, I'm Southern. We used to call them Sunday Christians. That's just an example. If they go to church, but they don't live what they believe the other 6 days of the week. And pagans do that also sometimes, you know. It's, yeah, you've got to, if you really want to grow, you've got to get in there and do what you need to do.
Right, exactly.
Well, I think that for me, like for and I think for all of us actually, or anybody that's on their spiritual journey, like truly looking at who you are is always very difficult. I mean, it sounds very simple, like know thyself, right? But you get into it, it's not easy at all. And yeah, the more I dig, the more it's like, oh, you know, it's definitely not what I thought. But I think that that's important because that's why the tarot line does not end with the star. You know, we still have to go through the moon, which I feel the moon is after the star is very, make that shadow, to me, that shadowy, dark place where things are down deep. You gotta go pull them out.
Right, we forget that we have to go into the soil of our experience. And if you ever put your hands in soil, it gets everywhere. It gets underneath your fingernails, your hands get dirty. But the soil is all that dead matter that we've collected over our experience. And we have to till the soil. And sometimes we'll cut our fingers on the rocks. And we have to come into appreciation for those rocks because they're part of the soil from which our life is going to grow. And when we come into contact with those deeper, heavier parts of self, we're able to love ourselves more fully because you can't really cut away your addictions. You can't cut away your traumas. They're there. It's about learning to love those parts of yourself without conditions so that you can stand whole in the presence and power of your experience.
Right. I love that. So, go ahead, Tim. Did you have something to say?
That just makes perfect sense. I think sometimes on the journey, people are so focused on looking at the destination, they forget to enjoy the path and to get all the experience that's really there. They kind of miss things.
Right.
I've been
A friend of mine once said the path is the destination. You know, and I think we forget that. We look too far ahead, and future thinking traps us in fear. Past thinking traps us in non-movement. So our future is just a projection of our past anyways. So when we come into presence, everything moves to clarity, and that gives us better connection to true direction versus just reactivity to what may or may not be real in front of us. So.
Right. Well, and I feel like it's so tempting to stop at the star where you think you're done growing, or you think you've arrived at this good place and everything, but it doesn't end there. But I think that's another. I think confronting those addictions and those dark places requires the vulnerability that's a piece of the star, because there's so much more to this card than it's. I mean, it's a very gentle, beautiful card, but it's also very, I think, deep in that sense that it I guess requires that vulnerability. So that's kind of what I want to get into, Michael, is how you see the star card as that vulnerability. In reference to your post that you were writing, that was beautiful, and I feel like you really kind of connected with that. And it's a shame we can't see you, because your tattoos are very piece of this also for you, your spirituality and stepping into vulnerability. So if you could kind of speak on the star in this.
So even when you asked me to do the post, the whole thing started for me, because tarot something is something it was the first thing I ever connected to, but it's never been something that's become a predominating piece of my practice, but it's something that I use in my personal practice. And I love the tarot because it gives me that visual way of connecting to my own spirit, my own sense of connection. So when you asked me to post, I actually had looked down in a cup of water, and I saw the stars on my face. And I said, well, I'm going to use the star card, because the spirit must be guiding me in that direction. And the thing that I did see in the star card was that vulnerability, because it's in the picture, there's nudity, and there's that nakedness, and there's that sense of presence. And for me, my tattoos bring me into that place of everyone's constantly staring at me. So I'm always entering into that place of having me be vulnerable to the external. So I'm constantly, they make me more naked than I thought they would. They put me on that world stage in a different way. And I always tell people, my tattoos are always working even when I'm not. And I have more star tattoos on me than I have any other tattoo. And for me, the star really is that coming into a place of vulnerability. But also the flowing of the water is that connecting into intuition. And there's the water from behind pouring into the stream, and we're pouring directly into the stream. So even our past helps to make up our current experience. And it's about coming to that place of balance, and having hope, because hope was another thing that I saw in this card. Because when we are taking charge of our life, when I see the activity in the card, it's more like we're coming into a place of balance, but we're being proactive and engaging that balance. So when I see that, it's creating that sense of deep connection to that intuitive space and letting intuition flow through us, rather than holding it back from us. And the star really does illuminate our way. It helps to illuminate the path for us. I was also a sailor, so for me the stars are really important, as far as engaging how we move through the world. So a lot of directional stuff comes up for me when I see this card. It's not just about standing in presence, but about finding our way through the life experience, more as a resting point than an end point.
I think universally, the star is probably the card that the most people are drawn to, and even people that aren't into tarot, wish upon a star, reach for the stars, And as far as tattoos, I think the stream of stars is probably the most popular tattoo out there. I see those everywhere. People just instinctively gravitate to that optimism and the hope that the star really entails.
Right. And I think it's in the post too. The thing about hope too is it's a double-edged sword. So there's that part of hope that we have to be cautious of. So a lot of times when we're not trusting our intuition, we'll hope for something that may not be in our best interest. You know, I hope that this relationship that's failing and that's making me miserable never ends, you know? And we get to those kinds of talk on the inside, even though everything within our being is saying, this star has fallen and a new one will rise. It's just a matter of allowing the stars to guide you to that next destination. So we have to be cautious with hope and not getting too caught up on it has to be a certain way, but letting the process evolve and letting that flow of the water carry us through that experience.
I agree, and about digging even deeper and looking beyond what is reflected, what's reflected in that water. Yeah. No, I agree, Tim. I like what you had to say. It's a very gentle, welcoming card, and so I think it's very tempting to stop, you know, with the star in the tarot line. Absolutely. Well, we are the star, really. I was thinking about, you know, the 5 points of the star, then the arms and legs, and Da Vinci, you know, the man.
Right.
Well, yeah. So we are the star.
Yeah, we're all 5 elements, constantly interacting and intersecting with themselves. It's like we're divinity constantly making love to itself, and we are all of those elements. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to connect to and to stand in the presence of, you know.
Right. You, Michael, you had mentioned that your tattoos, especially the ones like on your face, are so prominent and they make you constantly, you know, very vulnerable. But I'm also wondering if they, in a way, you're very much, I think, with your words and in your practice, a mirror for other people,
right?
Which can be good as you're kind of mirroring that commitment to be vulnerable, but also as what people maybe project onto you, I guess.
Right.
And maybe that's just as readers in general, I think we're used to kind of being that mirror. But if you could talk on the stars as the mirror, I think that's also great.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a great point to bring up, because I think too often we don't necessarily see ourselves as mirrors towards each other. But when you do something like this to really put yourself in that place where eyes turn to you, and I'm very introverted, so for me, I don't know what I was thinking that people wouldn't notice, but you know, I had no idea that it would be as much of a reactive thing to people. But I've had some really great conversations because of them. And I think that, and like I said, they are always working. And all of my tattoos are sacred symbology or spiritual symbols of some sort. They're mantras and they're prayers. So they become living parts of myself. So I become a living mirror. When people come and they want to have those discussions or even cast their eyes in either acceptance or aversion, I'm imprinting that moment on them and their reaction to that moment. So whether it be good or bad, we're all sharing that experience. And it pulls us out of our distractions, which I think when we truly look at ourselves in the mirror, we have to do so without the distractions. You know, when we start looking at ourselves, you know, oh, I'm too fat, or I'm too skinny, or I'm too this, or I don't like that about myself, we're getting to a very distractive kind of thing. But when we truly look at someone, and we look at things like tattoos, I always also like to say about my tattoos, they're walls or they're windows. So people can, if they read the story that's written on my body because of my tattoos, they see my journey. But for some people, they're walls, and they don't want to, you know, approach that space in any form of fashion, which is completely fine also. But even that reactivity and that aversion is now theirs to deal with. Because it imprinted itself on them. So I think, you know, it does do that. But through the conversation, and people do ask questions where they approve or disapprove. And I get to have some very lively discussions. I had a lady approach me in Whole Foods one time who was a Christian, devout Christian, and her mission was to convert me because of my tattoos. And we had this really lively debate in the middle of Whole Foods. And she had this big crowd like surrounding us, and we were going back and forth on the nature of spirituality. And she said, well, why did you get the tattoos? And I said, so that we could have this conversation right now, because if I didn't have them, you would just walk by me. We never would have been able to engage this space together. You know, and I think that's the thing that I do appreciate about them putting me into that place. And I think too with my tattoos, I can't separate myself from my work anymore. It's they're constantly there, so they've caused me to take ownership of my own reflection in this world as I project it out there. So I think that's important too, to take ownership of our path in a new and more profound way. It doesn't mean we have to, you know, as readers we do that. If you tell someone you read tarot, automatically there is now this thing that's being reflected back and forth between the two of you. I do Reiki, and it's like, oh, you get that look.
I personally took that step. I've had tattoos, but I have got a rather large Fool card tattooed on my arm that says loud and proud that I'm a reader.
Oh, excellent.
No escaping that.
Right.
No,
That's the one that I get the most comments, good and bad, about.
That's right, when you're owning it. And there's, I've got my Hermit's Lantern here, and of course the moon on my foot. Yeah, and it does create that space and open up, that dialogue. Yeah. What is it? What do you do? That kind of thing. No, I think there's, a lot of vulnerability and then a lot of courage with the Star Tarot card that I do feel gets overlooked, just in that it's so aesthetically just such a beautiful, beautiful card. So a couple things. I like what you had to say about the full acceptance of the woman in the card. You know, she's naked and she's looking at herself kind of in this mirror in the pool, and there's no distraction, no judgment. And I agree. I like that when the star comes up, it really does show that acceptance and that looking into the mirror, what's coming, what are you seeing, what's coming, being reflected back on you. And I like that. I really do. So do you feel that can you be a spiritual person without claiming your path? I guess I'm thinking of people who are in the closet as readers or as spiritual people, whatever religion they might be.
Right. I think you can, but at some point when you are dividing yourself, you begin to really feel the impact of that. For instance, I work with a lot of wonderful practitioners who are readers part-time, and in their other parts of their life, they are lawyers, doctors, etc., but they won't let those paths intersect. But the thing we don't realize is the spiritual is the mundane, and the mundane is the spiritual. And when you are forcibly dividing yourself, you are living two separate lives. And it becomes very difficult because you can't really show up to either part of your life when you're cutting one half of yourself out. And an example that I give is, for being gay, and when I was in the military, I was under don't ask, don't tell policy. So my entire life was spent living two separate realities. And it became more and more difficult to separate them. And I had a unique experience where they began to merge, and I was accepted in the merging, even under don't ask, don't tell, because I took ownership of both parts of my life. And I think that's what we end up coming to. I think you can only divide yourself for so long before they start to bleed into each other. And we aren't necessarily forced into making a choice, but we're forced to look at our path of integration. And that brings up another point in the card, too, is what does it mean to stand naked in the presence of your own experience? And when we are fully naked, we can be the reader and the lawyer, or the doctor, or the medium, or the Reiki practitioner, and not be afraid to stand naked in the presence of ourselves. Because we're dividing ourselves, I find it's not so much what we are afraid of what the world outside will say, but it's what we're afraid of what will change when I stand naked in my own presence. and I truly see my reflection.
I understand that 100%. My first tattoo is a double Greek male symbol, because I refused to be in the closet or hide who I was anymore, and that was like my statement to the world.
Right.
I think we might have lost Rebecca for a second here.
Okay. It's Mercury retrograde.
We shall carry on. Yes, Mercury. I think the wonderful thing is that the star, more than any other card, if you're in the tarot, we always have the star with us.
Right.
It's intrinsically a part of who we are. I mean, we all come from the star. And I know in integrating all the things that you do you find that, because I know you're a Reiki Master, I am also, do you find that that enhances when you are doing tarot, or do you keep that part separate?
I feel it enhances. I start every session, even when I do tarot for clients, with touch. So I always connect with the hands, and we establish that connection. But I always invite Reiki to be part of everything that I do, just as when I do Reiki sessions, I invite the intuitive side of me to also be part of that process. For a while, I would separate things because I felt like the client wanted this, therefore I was going to give them that. And what I found was, again, I was dividing myself. So what I did is I started to drop the labels and start to I just do what I do, and we'll see what happens when we show up together.
Right.
So there's been times when I'll do a Reiki session, and my client may be more visual. So what I'll do is I'll pull a tarot card for each chakra. So they'll see the issues presenting themselves through those cards, so we can have a dialogue now. So I think there's ways, and that's the beautiful thing about it. We can be as creative as we want. And that allows us to really do that integration work versus the separation work. But that's just taking more ownership of the path.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't when I first started reading, the first couple of clients when I went professional, but I always call in Reiki and bless the room and try and get that connection going. And I do think that every aspect of spirituality enhances the other one if you just let it.
Right.
Yeah.
They all work really well together. I find, my altars, I have Buddhas and Ganeshas and Jesuses and Marys, and they all get along really well. So I think when we do that within ourselves, and we allow ourselves to do that work of, what would Reiki look like embracing my tarot practice? Or what does my tarot practice look like when it embraces my mediumship work? And we start to do that. Let's see what happens. And this is why there's so many different ways to do spirituality, because people have really explored those intersections, and it's beautiful to see what you come up with.
Yeah. I just find if you can let go of your own ego and get out of your own way, it makes it so much easier.
Oh, absolutely. I tell my students when I teach Reiki, it's when you put your hand in front of the faucet, the water goes everywhere but to where it's supposed to go. So when you take your hand away from the faucet, the water just flows really naturally. And that's a beautiful thing. Like even in the star card, the jug in the back that's kind of flowing, the water knows where to go. If you get out of the way of the water, it just goes.
Yeah.
Well, and all of that, the integration, the release of ego, all of that is, very much the meaning of the Star Tarot card, and I love that. And I like the water example that you use, Michael, because I also tend to use water examples, like with my clients, you can't, it's like the stillness of the star and the calmness and the release of ego. It's like, if you have water in your palm, you can't squeeze it if you want to hang on to it, you just have to let it be and let it rest there. And so I like that.
I don't think people realize how transformative the star can actually be if you just embrace it and let it happen.
Well, I think it's because it's hard getting there, I think, because it sounds so easy, and I think that's what it is. Like, people, they're very comfortable where they are, even if they're not happy, they're very comfortable. And to get to the star, you got to go through the devil and the tower, and it's really hard. And So I think that's maybe a piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all part of the journey, and we're all, stardust. We are living expressions of those stars that died billions of years before we were even thought of. So we give the star life. We are, the living expression of those things that came so far before us. And I think when we're able to accept that, we're able to expand ourselves. And even in some traditions, the holy guardian soul is a star above us that we pull down into us for the connection. So it's important to understand that we are the star. We are that, but we go through that explosion, we go through that destruction to get there sometimes, and we're afraid to look at that part of ourselves, but those are important parts. The stars exploded to give us life.
Hey, I love that. Yeah.
As we're talking, and I think she's a perfect example of someone who embraced and lived the star card. I keep hearing Maya Angelou going through my head, because she really did speak to that experience and embracing it and fully living everything that the star offers you.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Love that. So, Mike, what's one thing that you do in your life to really connect you with the divine, with spirit?
For me, yoga is the thing that I do that really connects me to divinity. I think oftentimes we forget that the body is a vehicle for connection. It houses our divine spark. It is the physical body stores every memory that we've lived in this experience, every time we stubbed our toe, every heartache, every heart joy that we've had. So for me, when I do yoga or I do a body practice, like a static dance or movement, I'm coming into contact with my lower self, which bridges me into that place of connection with divinity. So for me, my yoga practice is really powerful for that, connection into source. But even just sitting and meditating or going for walks, I like to try to bring my physical self into my spiritual practice as much as possible. So that's the one thing I do every day is yoga.
Well, and doesn't the very word yoga, isn't that, I think it's Sanskrit, is it?
Yeah.
Like to yoke, body and spirit?
Right.
Okay.
Right, it does mean to yoke, and I think oftentimes when people start yoga, I always ask them, because a lot of yoga instructors will start the class by asking, what's ailing in your body or what you want to work on, but I always ask my students, what emotions are you working on? Because we forget that the body is also our emotional self. It's all those things, and when you yoke and you come into communion with the entirety of your experience, you're really at that point bridging into the soul. So it's about bringing presence to your yoga mat. The yoga mat is a sacred space. It's like your little temple you show up to. And I find journaling is my other, it's the one thing I tell all of my students to do. And every radio show I do, I always say journal, 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 because it is the place where you reflect and you can go deeper into my yoga practice. But what are you yoking with today? Our breath is an invitation, and yoga is about breathing. So what are you inviting into your body with your breath today? What emotion are you breathing in right now? And we're able to reflect on that and then work through that. We're able to stand more in power and presence.
I love yoga. I have a bad knee, so I probably do it very badly, but I started when I was really heavy. And I do it at home by myself. I don't go to classes, but I always do it nude, and I found that really did make me look at myself, accept myself, love myself the way I was then, even though I was on a journey of change.
Right. Yeah.
The illusion's gone.
It's powerful. When I lived in D.C., I was teaching a class for the Gay and Lesbian Center for the bear community, and we were having issues with a lot of the members of the bear and trans community going to yoga studios and not being accepted because of their body type or because of their gender identification. So we created a class, and we're just going to do a little intro to yoga class. It was going to last 4 sessions, and it lasted 4 years. And it was the longest community-based yoga program in DC, but we had people who felt like they couldn't do yoga or weren't able to stand in that place of community within yoga. And then it became something where people were having these life changes because of yoga. And because they started to look at themselves differently, it really brought in that vulnerability. It brought in that space of yoga's not about perfection. Yoga's about falling down. Yoga's about messing up. And yoga's about, you know, having a community that says it's okay because we're all going to do that at some point.
Right, so it really brought in the star. And I love that. Yes, I teach the chair yoga to my seniors. So I'll have a room of like, they're like, our average age is 95. And they're all doing like the tree pose in their chairs. And it's very cool. And I agree, I really feel that connection and community when they're all doing that and the eagle arms and everything. Like, it's just cool. Like, I really feel it. And I love it. I think it's definitely spirituality.
I always suggest some type of meditation to clients that are having problems with stress or, you know, and I try and tell them meditation doesn't have to be om and sitting and stilling your mind. Do a moving meditation. Yoga's, right? Belly dancing works so well for me. That's my center. Ecstatic dance, you know. It doesn't have to go for a walk. As long as it's something that puts you into a spiritual frame of mind, that's a meditation.
Right. And I find with yoga especially, it's not about getting away from stuff. Yoga's about showing up. And with all spirituality, showing up is the hardest part of the process. And once we show up, we're able to stand in our imperfections. We're able to do all of that stuff that happens after we show up. But it goes back to that vulnerability, because we have to be vulnerable enough to show up, even to meditation or to our spiritual practice. You know, it's about just showing up. And everything beyond that is going to be wonderful, but you first have to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to be there.
Right. I love that. Well, and I kind of wonder if there's like maybe the second part to that is like maybe showing up, absolutely, and then like a willingness to be seen almost.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. A willingness to be naked, you know, in that space, whatever, you know, whether it be physically or not, to be naked in your own process. And Thorne Coyle says this best. She says that, you know, it's not our fear of of showing up. It's what we're afraid of. What will change when we show up. It's that being vulnerable to everything has to now change. If I start my yoga path, my body's going to change. The way I breathe is going to change. You know, my body's going to ache. These changes are going to happen. So it's being okay with the change that comes with showing up.
I think the star, and that comes in with the hope we were talking about. There's a lot of people get stifled by the fear of failure, but just as many people get stifled by the fear of success.
Right.
Because what if you're successful and it doesn't change your life and people still don't like you and you're still not happy, and you know, it's definitely something you have to come to own in your life and allow the process to happen as it does.
Well, see, and I think that's very the moon that follows. I don't know, maybe, at least to me, like exploring what comes after the star, like exploring those fears. Yeah.
A lot of people just get stuck on the star and never move.
And it's all a cycle. Once we start the process, we are now engaging our life cycle, which is going to move with or without our presence. But the more involved we are, the more we're able to be part of the cycles of life and the rhythms of our own experience. And what I tell my students is not necessarily about finding stillness and peace. It's about being okay with the noise. You know, because it's going to be noisy. And even under the dark sky that's lit by the moon, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of fear sometimes in that space. But it's okay because you're engaging your process. And as long as you're trusting, and that's the bigger word, is trust. You know, trusting that even in the dark of night, that I'm going to be okay because I'm following my process. I'm part of the rhythm now.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Engagement. Yes.
When I started, I have Native American ancestry, so I do a shamanic path. And one of the first great lessons I learned was I have a bear spirit that helps me with my healing. First thing the bear did when I met him was dismember me because I was too full of crap and I couldn't get out of my own way. So it was a very good lesson to learn early. And he still dismembers me to this day every time I see him, so. Apparently I'm still a work in progress.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, we all are. We're working on it, but we're showing up, you know? That's
right.
Good. So, Michael, what's one thing that everybody, anybody can do to kind of cultivate this spirituality and this spiritual life for themselves? I mean, we're so busy. It's like I don't have time to be spiritual. You know, what's one thing that anybody can do? It's very simple.
Breathe consciously. That's the thing I tell all of my students. People always ask, well, how do I meditate? And I always offer a one breath meditation. If you are able to come into full presence with just one breath, you've done a lot. Because a lot of times you'll sit for an hour of meditation, you may breathe consciously 3 or 4 times. So you start with a breath. And what I find too is if you can do one breath, one deep, solid inhale where you're inviting in your full presence to the breath, and you're exhaling in full presence and expanding that breath outwards, you are now inviting in clarity. It's something you can do in the moment. It doesn't require special incense or music. I can do it in the grocery line or when I'm having an argument with a loved one. But just breathing. I think we take for granted the fact that we're breathing sometimes. Until you're drowning underwater, or until you hit yourself in the stomach and you lose your breath. Mm-hmm. We forget that we breathe. And breathing is our connection to Source. Breathing is, I always say breathing is the one true religion. We all do it. The murderers, the rapists, the politicians, the priests, everyone breathes. It's our sacred connection to everything. But we can't take that for granted because it's not guaranteed. Life isn't guaranteed, and our breath is something that is sacred. So if you do nothing more than breathe, you're engaging deep spiritual path. And you start from there, because conscious breath is powerful. It's an invitation.
I love that. And yeah, I know that, for me, there's so many times where I realize I haven't taken a breath,
Right.
It's like, and I think we're all like that on some level.
Right. Or we live on the inhale, where we're constantly going, life is like catching us, by left and right, and Mercury's retrograding, and full moons, and Friday the 13th, and everything's falling apart, and we're constantly inhaling. But it's when we exhale that we actually let go. And when we breathe in deep and we hold the breath, it's often because something in our mind caught the breath, and it stopped us from moving. It's holding us in our tracks. So we can just let go and just focus on your breath, and sometimes bringing your hand to your chest and feeling the rise and the fall of the chest and rhythm with the breath brings us back into the body.
I love that. So I'm kind of looking at the Star Tarot card as like the cosmic exhale. Like, I think that's great. Oh, it's beautiful. Awesome.
We don't have spiritual sleep apnea.
That's true. I think so. I like that. That's funny. I like that. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're coming towards the end here. Tim, how can the viewers get in touch with you?
You can find me on Facebook at Timothy's Tarot, or if you're in the Dover area, I do readings out of Bell Book and Candle. It's 678-4545.
All right. And Mike, what's coming up next for you? What are you working on? What's next for you?
For me, I'm constantly evolving my practice, and I'm actually designing and creating a new practice of yoga, which really integrates more of the ritualistic and ecstatic practice into the Vinyasa and meditation and the flow work. So lots of new things coming down the road. I'm planning a trip to DC soon to do readings and Reiki sessions and attunements and things. But I'm in South Carolina right now, so I'm kind of in transition and just kind of reorganizing my life and my practice. So, but people can find me at michaelbrazell.com, and my radio show's on blogtalkradio.com/Michael Brazell. So pretty easy. Just type in Michael Brazell and I'll come up in multiple places.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're pretty much everywhere at this point. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was an honor to have you on the show, and I love your insights, as always, and your words. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me on the show, and for you doing the work that you do. And just keep it up, because we need more voices out there creating waves and having conversations like this.
That's right, yeah. Start a dialogue. We're going to show up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Show up.
Show up.
Start a conversation. I like it. All right.
Okay.
Well, I'm your host, Rebecca Brown. You can get in touch with me by emailing the show, thetarottalkshow@gmail.com, and by visiting my blog, 365daysoftarot.com. Next week, I am so excited. Ivo Dominguez Jr. is going to be in the Tarot House with us. I cannot wait. He's going to be talking, or we are going to be talking about difficult questions, difficult topics, difficult clients, and how as a reader, we can really work through these. So it's going to be a great show with all of his guidance and advice. So I'm super excited. So that's next week. Join us next Monday, all Mondays really, on the Pair Encounters Network at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. We'll see you next Monday. So mo to be.
So mo to be.